This is Tony Reeves, and welcome to another edition of In the Know. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this fine day, and I hope you are having a good day already. So today I want to talk about what's called a day in the life of running your business. So I had a couple of people ask me recently when I had the opportunity to talk about what my experiences were like when I was running my own company and my own law firm for about almost 10 years. What was a day in the life like? And it was funny because as I stopped to answer the question, I had to pause and say that before I could answer that question, I had to let them know another aspect of it, which was it really depends on the day. And I know people were like, oh, you're just kind of, embellishing. Every day is different. No, it's not that every day was different. It's that if I were to focus on a day of how I ran my firm, it really has to be when it finally settled to be the type of firm that I wanted it to be. And you're going to say, well, what the heck does that mean? When you go to a business, especially one that's been around for a long period of time, it's probably easy to look at that business and say to yourself, they've been established, they got a routine going, so their day in their life is the same every day. But the reality is that when you're running your business, you're an evolving process. When you see a company, like take your favorite restaurant, when you go there, that restaurant didn't just happen to turn into that particular place overnight. It took them a while to get to that point. They had to go through different versions of themselves before they got to the point where everything kind of operates at a degree of predictability and consistency so that what they could expect from the beginning of the day, throughout the day, and towards the end of the day would be the same. And me running a business was no different. When I first started my practice back in 2007, I was working by myself and I was sharing office space with another established law firm who let me use their secretary. So you've got to stop and think about it. By the time I started in 2007, it was just me. I had a secretary that was somebody else's secretary who allowed me the ability to use their secretary, and they just answered the phone. That's all they did. They didn't screen calls. They didn't call people back on my behalf. All they did was answer the call and then basically transfer the call over to me. So basically, at the end of the day, that's really all that actually happened. So by 2007 to 2008, I picked up my first employee, which was my wife, as my office manager. By 2010, I had retained a third-party contractor as what we call virtual receptionists. So that made it possible for me to have somebody who not only could answer calls but screen calls while my wife was the office manager and was working on development. By the time I got to 2011, I then hired my first virtual paralegal, and her paralegal company actually provided additional paralegals as well. So what I found myself is that I didn't really get into the groove of actually having a staff of people, whether it be contractors or subcontractors, until probably about 2011. And when I started in 2007, the only thing other than myself, the only person I had who was working for me was an accountant who did some of my early years accounting. But it took them a couple of years before they transitioned to bookkeeping. So if you stop and you think about it, the firm, when I opened my doors and my day in the life in 2007 was very different by the time I got to 2011, 2012, and 13, when I now at that particular point had a virtual receptionist, I had two virtual paralegals, I had an office manager, and I had a CPA firm that was doing my bookkeeping. So at that particular point, all of those things were extremely, extremely different. And also, my locations were different. When I first started practicing, I was practicing out of that shared office that I was working with. That was in a different area, and being in a different town. So I had an office space in Bartow, Florida. Then I decided to open my own office space almost a year later, and so I had two office spaces. But then the reality was, most of my practice was what I would call a virtual practice, meaning I wasn't meeting clients at my offices. I was mostly meeting them either at their home. I was either meeting them in libraries, in courthouse conference rooms, or at the court that we practiced at that particular point in time. So same thing. Even though I, was practicing, during the first 3 years, I had basically 3 or 4 different locations that I was working at. And we're not going to talk about banks. I mean, literally, I started with one small bank, and by the time I closed my practice, I was on my 4th bank. And it wasn't because I was a bad customer. My first bank actually got bought out by another bank. I was having a lot of issues with that bank. So I had a friend of mine who recommended a bank that works great with attorneys. I went to that bank, and then that bank got bought out by a bigger bank. And all this happened literally over a good 3 to 4 year period of time. And so you have to now ask yourself, like, good gosh, with that degree of, uncertainty, weren't your days chaotic? Well, it wasn't that they were chaotic. It was just that I was an ever evolving practice in terms of the things that I was doing. And you also have to think about the fact that during this time period also, I was going through periods where I was trying to figure out what kind of practice I wanted to be. I had come out of working for 6 years as an associate doing a very specialized area of law. And I did that for 6 years. But then I knew I wanted to do other things. And I knew that I didn't want to just solely be focused on one practice area. So when I opened my practice, I was doing Social Security, disability, workers' comp, employment, probate, general, family, foreclosure defense. I was doing all those. But I was only making money really on about 3 or 4 of those. Like I was making money doing family law. I was making money doing probate law. I was making money doing employment law and Social Security. And so I did that for a good, I'd say probably about a good, if I remember correctly, 6 years until I decided to switch to solely focus on one practice area, and then I expanded it to 2. And I cannot believe most people fail to realize how wild that was for me. So promoting it in terms of marketing was also another thing. I mean, I was doing all types of advertising, pamphlets, business cards. I was in parades. I was in festivals. I was getting referrals, speaking engagements, shirts, ads in papers and programs. I had podcasts, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, blogs, chat functions. All of these things all played a part that drove me to one particular issue in terms of how was I making my money, what was the infrastructure I needed to make that money, and what was the culture I was trying to create. So when people ask me the question, all of those things came into play. But when people start asking me about a day in the life, I have to say it just depends on the day. What usually happens is people say, towards the end of the time you were in your practice, when you were about to close it, maybe about a year or 2 before, what was it like then? Were you stable at that point? And stable is not to imply that I wasn't making money, because I was making money every year, but the way I was making it and getting there was always a little different. But when people ask me about a day in the life towards the end, it's a little easier, because by that point in time, I had an infrastructure that worked for me. I had a predictability, a flow that I knew where the money was coming in, and then I had a culture I was setting. So let's take a second. Let's take a second and let me see if I can break down what a day in the life of my firm looked like for me running my own business. All right, so let's talk about what a day in the life of me running my own firm looked like for me once my practice was established. Well, first of all, it was kind of wild because the practice area that I was focused on towards the end of my practice was really heavily federally funded, meaning most of my fees were being paid by the federal government. So if I won a case and I got awarded benefits for my clients, then then those fees would come to me later on. So basically, as funny as it may seem, my practice basically ran from 8:30 in the morning to 5 p.m. I literally would get up every morning, and first thing I do was check my cell phone. And most people would say, oh, you were just looking for messages? No. I was checking my cell phone to see if I had gotten any deposits. Because as silly as it may seem, my flow would dictate the attitude I had for the day. And you're like, really? I was like, well, think about it. I'm sitting here in a situation where I knew money was coming. Like, I'd pay attention to cases, and I'd win a case. I'd get a outcome I was looking for. Then I'm just waiting for the monies. So, and the one thing that was cool was I was banking with Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo would literally have a notification in terms of how much money it was, who the client was it was for. And so I kind of knew it was there. And so what I would do is every morning, it's funny, my phone was set up so that I got text messages that let me know when a deposit had posted. And usually those text messages would come early in the morning. So every morning I would either do two things. I would check to see if there was a text, usually about 6:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock. Check to see if there was a text. And then once I got a chance to, if I didn't see a text, I would go to my app, open up the banking app to see if there was a deposit there. And you would say to yourself, okay, well, how would your day flow depending on that? Well, if it was a deposit, I tended to have a more laid back attitude about the rest of the day. If there wasn't a deposit, my attitude was really more geared towards being gung-ho about what can I do to generate revenue for that day, whether it be doing collections work, because I did have collections part of my practice, or seeing if there was places out there where there was money owed to me. It was not surprised. Don't be surprised if I didn't spend part of my day later on calling the various payment areas to say, hey, where's the money? So, but usually what happened is if this was a day, and let's assume that I don't have any court, well, get up 7 o'clock, check my phone. Usually after checking my phone, I would get up, throw on some sweatpants or some shorts, get over to the YMCA for about probably usually around 9 o'clock. Fortunately, I was very spoiled because I had an office manager and I had two virtual paralegals, and I had notification that was on my phone. So if anything jumped off, I was always notified. But the reality is that what I was doing, not too many crazy things happened. So what would happen is that I would literally go work out from 9 to 10. My work day didn't start till 10, which used to drive my wife crazy because she was like, yeah, rest of us starting our work day. Like she would get in the office at 8 o'clock because the doors would open at 8:30. And so with the paralegals, I would get there about 10. And so I'd get there about 10 o'clock. Usually I'm looking to see if there is any calls that I need to return. I want to get those return calls out the way because usually the rest of the day I'm spending reviewing the files, getting ready for any upcoming hearings that I have coming up. So I'm reviewing the calls. If there's calls that have to be screened, I'm doing that as well. If there's any attorney calls that I get, I'm returning those calls. Usually what ends up happening is I get back about, work till 10 o'clock, get back to the house about 10:30. In theory, I probably didn't start my work day until about 11. And then usually from 11 to the closing, I'd be rocking and rolling, doing the things like I said, reviewing files, preparing briefs, doing things of that nature. Usually what happens is that my wife would basically shut everything down at 5, and then we would pivot because she would then go, start making us dinner and so forth. But I kept working. So it was not uncommon for me to work from like 11 o'clock in the morning, sometimes to 8, 9 o'clock at night, depending on what's going on. And then what a lot of times I would do is that once the evening time came, after I got through eating breakfast and lunch and then dinner, I would then spend a lot of my time in the evening time. If I wasn't reviewing files, responding to any emails that I haven't responded to, responding to internal client messages, as well as preparing, doing, and creating YouTube videos for my YouTube channel. And that typically was my day, unless there was a court day. Court day was a little different. Court day is still the same thing. I would get up in the morning. I would check my phone to see if I had any deposits. But then basically I would get up, shower or shave. I wouldn't go to the gym. And because a lot of times I had my court cases set up so that I could go in the morning. My philosophy was always I want to get whatever court cases or trial function, anything that I needed to have done, I wanted to have it done before 1 o'clock so I could have the rest of the afternoon. Didn't always work out like that, but that invariably was the best way for me to have it. And then what would happen is when I got back, wrote up whatever notes that I needed to put in the case management system, again, returning any calls or any messages that I had to respond to, and then basically, seeing what I got to get ready to do for the very next day and working and rocking and rolling accordingly. All this was part of my day in the life routine. And it sounds boring, and you're thinking, well, did you do that all the time? Well, the days are sometimes different. If I had I had clients at one point in time. I had clients all over the country, so it was not uncommon for me to, fly out to Pennsylvania, fly out to Wisconsin, fly out to New Mexico for a couple of days to knock out a hearing. Or one time I made a road trip where I literally drove from Florida to Tennessee. It was the exciting part about my day in my life is that it was always changing because weird stuff was always happening, but the structure was pretty much the same. What you're going to find at the end of the day is as you are sitting here trying to build your own business and get your own business going, you're going to look to try to do one of three things, as I indicated as well. You're going to want to make sure that you have an infrastructure in place to do the things that you wanted to do. You're going to also want to ensure that you have the culture of the company, your company, as you set forth. And then what you also want to do is you want to figure out how are you going to make your money? How are you going to get your flow? Listen, when you're talking to somebody who's been running their own business for a while, don't get fixated on the day-to-day things that they do, because guess what? They'll tell you the reason why the day in the life always changes is because when they get up in the morning, they don't know what's going to come through that door. They know that they have an infrastructure that allows them to address whatever comes through that door. They know that whoever comes through that door, they want them to have a certain type of experience when they're coming through the door. And most importantly, your main function is to do whatever is possible to generate as much revenue as possible from them coming through that door. So as you're talking to people, asking them about a day in the life of what it means for them to run their business, remember this. Running your business always means one thing. You are constantly running. All right, everyone. Again, that's another edition of In the Know. And as always, I have to ask you this question. Are you ready for the Anthony Reeves Experience?